Liz Cheney, there are several things that are a problem with her, including the fact that Liz Cheney bought a home in Wyoming in 2012 so that she could run for Senate against Mike Enzi. That imploded, and she was not able to pursue that any further. And then we heard very little from Liz Cheney after that until 2016, when our congressional seat came open, and she came back to Wyoming to run for that. Liz Cheney lives in Washington, D.C. That's where her family, or not Washington, D.C., excuse me, Northern Virginia. That's where her family resides. Her husband works for a law firm back there that does work for China, by the way. We can talk about that in a moment. Liz Cheney has very, very, very few ties to Wyoming. I realize that her father represented the state of Wyoming over 30 years ago, but Liz Cheney's had very little, very few ties to Wyoming and very little interest in the state of Wyoming. She talks a good game, but if you scratch her, what you find is she's very, very shallow.
I'm sure some people are watching this going, well, wait, Dave, even if it's just even if it is the at-large congressional district, why are you talking to a congressional candidate from Wyoming? It seems a little obscure from a national perspective. But actually, here's the bumper sticker for this episode. You are running against a woman by the name of Liz Cheney. Now, of course, Liz Cheney has become a sort of star amongst the CNN, MSNBC crowd as a Republican who pretty much is against Republicans. And, she obsessed with January 6th and the quote unquote insurrection and everything else. So I don't want to lead you too much. I might have done it already. Why don't you give me your feelings on Liz Cheney and how she relates to Wyoming?
Liz Cheney betrayed our state. She betrayed our country. And I'll tell you a couple of reasons of why I say that, because I know that's a fairly bold statement, but that's why I made the decision to run against her. I've had a successful law practice. I've been working for a nonprofit law firm out of Washington, D.C. for a while. I love the work that I do, but there needs to be a change. And we needed to put someone up who had the ability to take on Liz Cheney and win this battle for Wyoming and for our country. Liz Cheney, there are several things that are a problem with her, including the fact that Liz Cheney bought a home in Wyoming in 2012 so that she could run for Senate against Mike Enzi. That imploded, and she was not able to pursue that any further. And then we heard very little from Liz Cheney after that until 2016, when our congressional seat came open, and she came back to Wyoming to run for that. Liz Cheney lives in Washington, D.C. That's where her family, or not Washington, D.C., excuse me, Northern Virginia. That's where her family resides. Her husband works for a law firm back there that does work for China, by the way. We can talk about that in a moment. Liz Cheney has very, very, very few ties to Wyoming. I realize that her father represented the state of Wyoming over 30 years ago, but Liz Cheney's had very little, very few ties to Wyoming and very little interest in the state of Wyoming. She talks a good game, but if you scratch her, what you find is she's very, very shallow. She's very shallow on the issues that are so important to Wyoming. Again, our energy issues, our agricultural issues, and then also the regulatory issues. Over 48% of our surface estate is owned by the federal government, and 65% of our mineral estate is owned by the federal government. So we have a huge federal footprint. And the regulations coming out of Washington, D.C. have been crushing us, but she hasn't done much to actually fix that. She does not represent Wyoming, and she isn't representing our interests. As far as the January 6th, I've started describing it this way. We have separation of powers for a reason. And I know she keeps coming back to that you are either for the Constitution or you're for Donald Trump, but you can't be for both. That's a binary that makes no sense whatsoever. And especially as someone who is actually a constitutional attorney, it's actually kind of a stupid statement. And it's a stupid statement for a lot of reasons, including that it ignores the vast, ignores the Constitution itself. But here's one of the fundamental things I think people need to understand about what Liz Cheney is doing, is we have a separation of powers. The legislative branch writes the laws. The executive branch carries them out, and the judiciary makes decisions, from criminal law to criminal cases to deciding, disputes between neighbors. What this commission has done is taken on the role of all of them, but most importantly, this January 6th commission is acting as the prosecutor. They're presenting evidence to themselves as the judiciary, and then they are going to be making the decision as the jury. So they have actually subsumed in themselves all aspects of decision making. They will decide what evidence comes in, and if it doesn't fit their narrative, we'll never see it. It'll never see the light of day. The fact that they kept that Nancy Pelosi, would probably most likely with Liz Cheney's guidance, kept Jim Jordan out of that committee tells you from the very beginning that there was a narrative that they were going to pursue, and that's what they're pursuing. So Liz Cheney spends all of her time. She even said it a couple of days ago.
Do we know that that was a fact? I don't remember that specifically. Do we know for sure that she was guiding Pelosi in terms of keeping Jim Jordan and some of those people off the committee?
I don't know that for a fact, but keep in mind how much she disdains.
I think we have a lot of reasons to believe it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's reasonable. And the fact that she and Adam Kinzinger are the only two so-called Republicans on that committee, they didn't want a Jim Jordan and a Jim Banks asking questions about, well, wait a minute, what about security that day? Why wasn't there more security? When did you know about this? Were there provocateurs in the crowd, and who were those provocateurs? Were there any FBI informants? Were there FBI employees? Were there other people? Those are the kinds of things that are never going to be presented as part of this commission. So what you've got is you've got a prosecutor who is going to ignore any evidence that doesn't support their narrative, presenting a case to themselves to decide what happened on January 6th. And so if you want to talk about being, unconstitutional or extra constitutional, it seems to me that this commission is one of the very first places to start. This is a star chamber, and their intent is to come out with a report that they can hang around the neck of Donald Trump, and that they can try to ostracize those of us who support him and conservatives from now until the end of time. That's the purpose of this. We know it, and that's what she spends her time on, and we're embarrassed. She's using Wyoming as the launch pad to give her the power to do that.
What do you think her true angle is with this? I mean, obviously she's getting a lot of mainstream cred, right? They love her because she's sort of what I call the pet Republican. She does whatever the mainstream wants, and then that's the type of Republican they like. And then the second she does something that they don't like, then they're done with her and they pick somebody else. But do you think her angle is purely because, well, perhaps what you just said about her husband, but also because, her father was the vice president. He's so entrenched in the swamp that she's just protecting the thing. She's protecting the D.C. thing, regardless of what the constituents maybe in Wyoming want. I can't imagine a lot you're hearing when you're out there, a lot of people going, oh, this is the most important issue of the day.
Number one, it isn't the most important issue for the day for people in Wyoming. I think that there are Democrats in Wyoming who want to continue to bang that drum, but that just further supports the position I'm taking on this. As far as her agenda goes, I think that she made the decision in the fall of 2020, and perhaps even before that this was basically a battle between her and the President Trump faction of the party. She made the decision that she was going to go after him. And around November of 2020, she was the very first, especially high-up Republican, that called for President Trump to concede and that the election was fine, that there was no problem with it. So it was at that point that she realized that it was either going to be President Trump and his followers, or it was going to be her. And she started rallying the forces, rallying the swamp to try to take him out. Keep in mind, she's the one that organized the letter from the Secretaries of Defense saying that President Trump was unfit for office. Why that's really important is that that letter was issued prior to January 6th. It wasn't based on what happened on January 6th. I believe that they issued that letter on January 4th. So there wasn't even anything to point to. So I think that she went all in. Okay, it's either Trump or me. And that's where she is. And I think that she thought, we're going to take him out. This is the kill shot. This is going to be the end of it. And all they've done is they've strengthened him, and they've exposed the swamp and exposed themselves for what they are. So I don't know what her end goal is. I don't know what her long-term plans are. Being from Wyoming, I cannot imagine why she would do what she's doing. But it obviously has to do with the fact that people in Washington, D.C. think very differently than we do out here in the real world.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.